Yeah, and I mean that gets into some of the other questions we got, like about modification of lifts and stuff like that. Because I know you touched on that a little bit earlier.
Hmm.
Um, but like in powerlifting, I feel like it's always tough because it's like you have your three main lifts that you have to do, versus in body, like 3DMJ has six they prefer to use with most people, but open to a lot of different variation. Um, and I think that's where like sometimes we can get away with it in powerlifting, but it's like it depends on the individual because some people aren't gonna see like a very big carryover on like a dumbbell bench to like their actual like barbell bench press, or like some people may you may want to do a front squat. There are people that I've seen like Mike Teixeira. I don't think deadlifts much anymore, but he like front squats and he makes up for it in other ways, and then he still comes out and like can hit these numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always tough to work with a power lifter versus a bodybuilder because bodybuilding, I mean, at the end of the day, hypertrophy is easy. Like you could do push-ups with a weight on your back and you still
Yeah,
grow your chest as long as like not necessarily, but it's easier to get the goal of hypertrophy or a training effect if you have more variation possibilities with your movements. Um, yeah, it's tough. Powerlifting is always a bit tricky when we're talking about making modifications to kind of work around pain because that principle of specificity, we want to get as close to the movement as possible that we want. And sometimes it's easier with a bodybuilder because, I mean, hypertrophy. There are plenty of ways that we can stimulate a muscle to grow, different movements, even different ranges of motion. If we have to limit the range of motion, like we can still find a way to get that training effect. Whereas with powerlifting, and like you said, it's very specific to different people too. So some people may have good carryover with a dumbbell press or with like a different variation of a deadlift or a bench press. Other people may not, and especially when we talk about things like limiting range of motion, for example, either pulling a deadlift from blocks off a floor or doing a box squat or limiting the range of motion on a bench press, like to work around pain, you're also getting judged on how you're doing those movements. So you have to hit certain depth. You have to, the bar has to go a certain path with the bench press and stuff like that. So it gets very challenging, more challenging than a bodybuilder, in my opinion, when we're working with a power lifter.
yeah, and that's where I work on a lot. Where say like for the squat, for example, like we can change different variables, and as long as we're confident that like when the person's on the platform, they're going to be able to perform it to their competition standard. Like I have no problem saying like, well, I'd recommend like maybe say based on that person, depth or volume or things like that. The harder part is when it gets to be the intensity because of specificity, that they're more intolerant to versus generalized volume. Like we can keep a lot more adaptation as long as we're performing the movement and stuff. But like I always try and start with, okay, well, let's change let's do a box squat instead of a full depth squat, or can we do like a rack squat? Or sometimes
Hmm.
I've even had some people where just doing like a pause or something, maybe that they're getting into a position that's not less tolerable. And by making them do like certain pauses or something, that makes them focus on their technique a little bit differently and they feel better after
Right.
that versus the way they were doing it before. Like, especially if you can see that somebody's like rushing through their reps, getting them to slow down a little bit and take time and focus on their technique. Not that technique it's in itself can always lead to injury, in my opinion, but it can definitely play a part if it's, if somebody comes back and says, hey, like when I'm squatting, you know, I'm having this pain, and then you look at it and you go, okay, well, is there ways that we can modify this to make it more tolerable?
Right, and that you hit the nail on the head there with with technique because that's kind of how I see it as well. Not so, for example, like rounding your back a bit at the bottom of a squat may not cause your discs to pop out, but
Mm-hmm.
if you're getting back pain at the bottom of a squat, as soon as you round your back, cueing a bit more of a neutral, I don't want to neutral
Yeah,
spine. but a little bit less of a butt wink or whatever. Maybe that for that person will do the trick. Or changing the stance or the way that their toes are pointed out or something like that. So not that rounding the back a bit is bad, or not that the foot position that they had was bad, but it's just another way to modify or change up that stimulus. So you're still kind of grooving that movement, but not provoking that pain.
But yeah, and I get what you're saying too, because it's so hard to like, sometimes we have to use those terms to like explain it to people. So like you'll hear us catch ourselves and like not want to say something some way, because it's like in the way that we normally talk to people, we don't want to develop this association with certain things, but sometimes it's easier just to like say, keep a neutral spine, because somebody's going to know what it means, versus taking 10 minutes to explain to them why it may not be actually possible to maintain a neutral spine while you're squatting or deadlifting.
Right. And then if the interpretation after we explain that is, so I need to strengthen my core.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you know what? If that's what it means, like for us in our minds, we're saying we're gonna improve the control of your pelvis, like as you're going down, and we're gonna modify the position of your pelvis a little bit as you're squatting down. I guess I could see it as strengthening your core, like you're strengthening your connection to your core, I guess. Like
Yeah, like your mind muscle connection, or your
right,
technique, like
right,
how
right,
you perceive it.
right. Yeah. So yeah, definitely, I think we have to be aware of some of the terms that are floating around out there and understand that language is just language. Like if it means the same things and we're getting the same results, as long as it's not some kind of false narrative. Like sometimes, it's okay to use those buzz terms, so to speak.
Yeah, because I think some people understand that better. And so when people watch this, they're going to say, like, well, what is, there'll be certain things, and they're like, well, what does that actually mean?
Right.
Um, because when we get into the technique, like, obviously for powerlifting, there's more of like a standard of like, I have to hit X, depth in my squat, I have to hit certain position, in my deadlift, not drop the deadlift, show control in the movement, like hit bench press commands, like, pause, press, rack, stuff like that. But within that, there's going to be this maybe positioning for a specific person that maybe like physics wise more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And when people are injured, they may gravitate more towards those efficient positions anyways. But very individual, like, I can, just for example, like most people, I would think don't really deadlift as much with shoes, or like try and get as flat as possible. But for me, like recently, I've started deadlifting in shoes again, and I found that I actually maintain a better position, and it just like looks cleaner when I do it. Like I have a significant kyphosis in my spine, so when I deadlift, sometimes I would round forward, and makes it harder to lock it out. Like
Mm-hmm.
now, I do get some soreness afterwards, but I haven't had an injury from that. But definitely, it was affecting my performance. So there's different nuances of technique. Everybody's going to have a little bit of their own opinion too, and I think that's okay,
Yeah.
because research isn't black and white. There's going to be a nuance for everyone.
Right. Yeah, and I'm coming at it from more of a bodybuilding perspective, where, you know, versus bodybuilding versus powerlifting versus like Olympic lifting.
Yep.
Powerlifting and Olympic lifting, like there is probably a smaller window of good, quote unquote, good form for performance, like you're saying, not necessarily injury reduction. That's going to be just more efficient, to move those weights, and those, there's more skill, I guess, to that performance than coming out from a bodybuilding perspective.
Yeah, it gets back to that. I forget who said it now, but it's it's either Matt Gary or like Mike Chair or someone that I've listened to a lot to, but they say strength is a skill. You see a lot of powerlifters, I think, like, because Bryce Lewis is very much stats, and I remember for a while he would post stats of like average ages that somebody was competing at Worlds, and like the average age was like 32 or something. So it's like, and you see now all these powerlifters that are maintaining, like, the older they are, they're getting better and better and better.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Even in natural bodybuilding, like the best guys are in their 40s. Like
Hmm.
the best natural bodybuilders in the world are up there in their 40s for the most part, and it's just because they have years and years of consistency, like building that muscle. Like when you're not using drugs to kind of get that muscle built on there, it's to be the best. It's more of not how hard can you go tomorrow at the gym. It's more how much can you focus on longevity and staying healthy and continuing this thing for the long term, because the more years you're in it, the better you will be at it. And yeah, it may not there may not be skill like powerlifting skill, but in bodybuilding it's more like learning your body and figuring out and just getting on board with that long, slow, boring process of building muscle and improving year after year.
I think too, there's like a skill in learning, like I would never say that correlation is causation, and like say there's a specific movement and I find that I get injured every time that's like in my program, like that could just be something that happens. But I definitely think that's where in bodybuilding and even powerlifting programming, we can say like, okay, that seems to be the case. So for longevity, let's do something different than that.
Hmm.
Or let's, oh, every time we do like this style of like increasing your volume, like we have to take a look at like how are we programming for somebody, and like how has that influenced them in the past, and hopefully learn, so that, because we're all going to start like, like you said, muscle and strength pyramids, for example. If somebody goes through and reads that, you're going to have a very good idea of where to start for the majority of people. But then you have to always tweak that, then get more data points, bring that stuff back, look at it. Okay, now where do I go from here? Like, am I on the left side of this where maybe I need less volume, or am I on the higher end where I need more volume, or changes in intensity, or changes in like rep ranges, like, and those are all things we can play around with too for like longevity of injury, because there may be somebody that mentally just doesn't respond well to like giving them like a 20 rep set on certain things, or like even like for myself, if I do anything on squat, bench, or deadlift, usually over 6 reps, like I don't want to do it.
Right. Yeah, and what you're saying, how you could be on the one end of it, you could be on the other end of it, but you have to kind of see where you are and what works good for you. Um, I think a lot of times people are drawn away from that because
Hmm.
they want optimal, they want it today.
Yeah.
So they can listen to that recommendation, or like you're saying, or like Eric is saying, or like I'm saying, and but then they swipe down on Instagram a little bit, and then they see like, bang, like this is the program that's going to help. And okay, well, this seems a lot easier. Like they figured it
Yeah.
out, and there's no guesswork into it. So let's just, go with this easy, quick fix. And I'm speaking in generalization, of course. Like I don't think
Yeah.
everyone is like that, but I think sometimes
It
there's
does
that,
happen though.
right. There's that urge to just tell me what I need to know, give me the secret formula, and it's, much easier. And, that's why companies and people like that sell this kind of stuff, and that's why they exist, because people buy it, I guess.
Yeah. And then we come in and talk about the nuance, and we get like 100 likes and they get like 1 million.
Yeah, no. Yeah, and it almost seems like we don't know what we're talking about because we can't give an answer. It's
Yeah.
like, well, they must not know what they're talking about if they can't give me an answer. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And well,
it always makes me laugh how I'll get like there'll be an ad that pops up for
mhm.
like something ridiculous, like some crazy like supplement, or like I saw this one thing. It was like a I don't even want to say the name so people don't Google it, but it was like this little mechanism that like worked your chest. Like it was like this little thing that you squeezed to build your chest, and they had like this big jack dude like advertising it. And like the amount of likes and views on that ad were like crazy. And I'm like, man,
Mm.
like if only the people who were, who I don't know, who knew more about this stuff got more attention, it'd be completely different. But I guess it's what sells, gets more popular.
Yeah. And then I think too, like that gets into like the whole thing of like our injury management and stuff too, because like a lot of times you don't see me or you really post a lot of times of like, oh, do this exercise if you have this going on. Because I think it's a lot more nuanced and you have to get very like a good understanding of that person. And like you said, you get their spreadsheets, you get all that stuff, you look at it, like what can I see? I think that's where you can get into like the acute to chronic workload ratios and stuff like that. If you have enough data points and see, okay, how can we manage those things? And somebody doesn't understand that. Do you want to explain what those are a little bit?
Yeah, so that was one of the questions that we received, and it was a great question. So acute to chronic workload ratios, basically in a nutshell, is the amount of work that you're doing in like an acute phase compared to your total work. So if you have a spike in volume, how much is too much of a spike and how much is not working hard enough. And the idea is that there's some sort of ratio that will help us predict injury. And I guess, and even the authors of the studies of these, of these topics, they'll be the first ones to say like this was never meant to be a like solid number like to hit, because it's so nuanced and it's so hard, especially if you try to extrapolate it over different kinds of sports.
Yeah.
Like what is a variable of work or volume for a soccer player versus a weightlifter versus an ice skater, right? Like it's so hard to measure these things. So I think it's steps in the right direction. Like we're trying to find that that balance between volume and overall recovery, I guess. But it's just so hard with something like injury because there's so many things that can contribute to it, whether it's you had an argument with your spouse the night before, or you had a bad night's sleep, or you didn't drink quite as much water, or I mean, anything at all like can contribute to it. So it's tough. I think it's tough to get like an exact ratio, an exact number. And then if you have that number, what are you going to do with it then? Is it going to impact what you do moving forward? And that's one of the things that Quinn Hennick from Clinical Athlete says a lot is, any kind of test or any kind of measurement that we do, before we do it or before we explore the accuracy of it or the validity of it, we have to make sure that even if it does test what we think it tests, is it going to change what we do moving forward? And if the answer is no, maybe, it's not that useful to do.
Yeah. I mean, and that's something that we are developing like a new athlete management program. So we send out programs. They're going to look a little bit different soon here. But one of the things that I asked to be included is like, I want sessional RPEs or like sometimes like a week or block RPE, sleep, different things like that. So that way, if I'm consulting with an athlete, can I see that they're, because like I think sessional RPE trends go into that acute to chronic workload. And if you see all of a sudden, somebody went from, I think most training, we end up somewhere between like a 7 and 8 for the majority of people. But if now like their average has gone up, like say it was at a flat 7, and then now it's like 8, 9, and there's some 10s in there. Okay, that's telling me something has changed. What can we influence on the back end? Like, is there something that we can change about their program that we may not be able to control their factors of their life? Or like, is their sleep declining? Is their nutrition different? Like, what can we see trends of at least and try and correlate it and then change it? Because I think there are a few studies that show like sessional RPE had a good relationship with injury.
Yep.
And it'll tell, like, there's even a track, like I have my Fitbit on. There's a tracker similar to a Fitbit that tracks it's like sleep, heart rate variability, a couple other things, and you like log your workouts and stuff in it. And then it gives you like a graph and it says like, okay, you're probably not as optimally recovered and stuff. And there's even some studies I think they've done internally where some people have been able to tell like that they're going to get sick just from when they're their graph declines, they're finding some of their clients are saying like that this has predicted my poorer recovery, and then I got like an illness because there may be some things that you're not able to subjectively look at and say like, because there's usually that latency phase where you have something, it's got to brew a little bit, and then it presents to us like on the surface.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff, definitely. And it goes to show how everything is connected, right? Like you can get sick, from things like that. And I guess my question would be, and I'm sure you've heard this side of it too, is like, is that a self-fulfilling prophecy then?
Yeah.
Right. So like if I wake up, I don't have a Fitbit, like I don't track my sleep. I mean, I have an idea of how much I sleep, but if I wake up in the morning and I notice that I got 4 hours of sleep, I know a person like me, I'm going to take that with me throughout my entire day. Like I'm going to be maybe a little sluggish at work. If I forget something, I'm going to be like, ah, damn, that 4 hours of sleep got me. Like, I can't remember where my keys are. I got to, it's because I got 4 hours last night. Or maybe I'll be a little bit more hesitant in the gym, like subconsciously or something like that. Or so those measurements are great. I guess the way to test it would be if the people don't see the results, like if it just gets sent to a lab somewhere, and then you can kind of analyze that. But I think in general, like the general population, with all these tools that we have to track their different fitness levels and heart rate variability and things like that, I think sometimes it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy when they have too much information. It's like, well, just kind of go throughout your day, like just live. Like our bodies are pretty adaptable. Like even if you had 6 hours of sleep and usually get 8, like it's not the end of the world. Like your body will bounce back, once it gets some sunlight and starts moving around. I think it's awesome the amount of information that we have, but sometimes I don't know. I think too much information in the wrong hands could be bad.
And I think that's where, for us, we got to know the athlete, and that's where I think the relationship with the coach and us helps a lot, because like, messaging a coach and stuff like that, I might say like, I want this data, but like, what kind of person is this? Like, are they the type of person that they're going to get like too analytical about certain things, and then that's going to make more problems than it's worth? Or is it someone that I got to just say like, because we have some people that I think majority of the time we're known for doing more percentage-based training. But we do have some people, like my program, for example, is all pretty much RPE based on my main lifts. But that auto-regulation, like I can do fine with that. Like I'm actually kind of like Andrea, where she talks about like you go in and every time you want to beat it. But I've gotten a little bit more mature at saying like, okay, like I'm feeling X, Y, or Z today. I know that I'm not like, that's not going to be a 7, and then it's not going to be on the plan for what we want. So for some athletes, I got to say like, okay, instead of me now making you track your RPE when you've always done percentage basis, I'm just going to flat like change your percentage, because, if I start having you do that and then you get obsessive about that, then that's going to be better in our management here, versus some people, we can give them like an RP caveat, and we can tone down your RP so you're not killing yourself. Like, hey, if it's above that, we need to decrease the weight regardless what percentage I gave you, because we're looking for this type of outcome. And then just knowing like, okay, how many variables can I have a person look at in their sessions, or do I need to make it very narrow?
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, it comes down to knowing the athlete and knowing the person. And I think even the act of considering RPE, like how a session felt, I think that's just shifting from the weight on the bar and the reps, just shifting from look internally, like, all right, how did that feel? Like in general, how did that feel? I think looking inward, even just trying to look inward, I think the act of doing that is beneficial, almost like meditation. Like, even if you're not a great meditator, like just trying to meditate probably has benefits than, rather than not. So yeah, I think that's RP is probably, like you said, there's studies to support it too. And that's, it's a really big factor to consider.
Yeah, and I think Tim Gabbett gets a little bit into that in his stuff on acute and chronic workload, like RPE. Monotony has a big part to play in some of it. Like I know that, so I always use myself for example because I know myself the best of any person. I went from 230 pounds to now I'm like in the 200 range. Like I'm around where like a 93 kilo lifter would be, which is right where I want to be weight class wise. I might compete again in the future, but it depends on where my lifts get. But I know that big swing, like it just made it so that everything was like awful in the gym and I didn't want to go in and stuff like that. RPE based training really helped like bring that back. And then now I'm slowly building up and they're, controlling what variables that I can, and getting rid of some monotony in my training. So like the act of just having these specific things all the time was kind of, you can get bored with that. Like some people do really well with that. Like we can see with some lifters, like if you give them the same thing all the time and make slight adjustments, they're going to be fine with that. They like that. There's other people that you need to change things up. And one of the things that Tim Gabbett talks about, if your monotony gets above like kind of that enjoyment and stuff out of that may be a predictor for injury because you're just not you're not fully present in there at a time when sometimes you should be, like if you're going to do like singles on a lift or you're going to do an AMRAP, like you kind of need to be mentally there. Otherwise it could lead to some issues.
Yeah. Awesome point. Yep.
Yeah. And then I don't know if we kind of want to wrap up a little bit. I know we've been going for a little while here, and then I think it could lead to more questions, and then maybe, who knows, down the line we can hopefully get together again a little bit and talk with people.
Absolutely, yeah. Hey, I'd love to.
Do you want to plug like whatever you got, like any projects you got, where people can find you, all that?
Okay, yeah. So I guess social media, Instagram, Nick Licameli, and of course 3dmj.com. Well, it's 3dmusclejourney.com, the number 3, letter D, musclejourney.com. And then I also have my own online physical therapy / consulting company called Strength Together Incorporated. So strengthtogetheronline.com. Go over there, and if you want to find out any more about me or what I do, and yeah, pretty much between all those, you can track me down and reach out to me. Any questions at all, shoot me an email, drop me a message, and I'd be happy to connect.
Awesome. So it's because some of this is going to be not just on my channel. I want to say you can find me at Strength and Evidence _physio on Instagram. That's my most available place. I have a Facebook page, Strength and Evidence Physiotherapy, and a group, Strength and Evidence Physio, on Facebook. That's about it for me. Otherwise, you can find me on thestrengthguys.com under our team. Did you mention your YouTube channel too?
All right. So so just put in my name in YouTube, and I've been have my channel for a couple of years now. I put a video out, one video out per week. Sometimes it's some training things, sometimes it's more mindset things, but and some stupid dad jokes thrown in there, or bad humor, but yeah, it's all pretty good stuff. And yeah, so yeah, head over to YouTube too, and you can find me there as well.
Yeah, but we're on par now. We're actually dads, so we can make those jokes, and it's okay.
That's right. Yeah. You have a 6-month-old, I have a 4-month-old, so you're like me in 2 months in the future.
Yeah. So definitely go check all those out. Check Nick's stuff out. He's got great content. And then leave any questions any of you have, anything we got into but didn't maybe go in as depth as you wanted, things like that, because then that gives us opportunities to go over more, know what you guys actually want us to cover. We kind of started general, went over a lot of things, so leave us some questions. All right, thanks, Nick.
All right, thank you.